Hello friends, it's Alice here. I'm taking a break from podcasting this week, so I thought I would re-air a previous episode. For new listeners, I like to dip into the back catalog every now and then, and this episode's a personal favorite. Consent in the Path of Pleasure with Betty Martin. Betty's an internationally recognized author and expert on the topic of consent. While much of our work really focuses on sexuality and intimacy, this conversation's really focused around getting to the yes in all relationships, new and old. I hope you enjoy it.
You are listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Hello, dear listener. My name is Silas Rose, and you're tuned into Awake in Relationship. As mammals, we are really wired for pleasure, and without it, I really believe that our mental, physical, and dare I say, spiritual well-being suffers. There are, of course, many forms of pleasure, and as far as I'm concerned, whatever floats your boat, so long as no one's harmed. In my conversation with Betty Martin, we focus mostly on tactile pleasures, or specifically touch, which can be kind of a tricky thing these days. I think it's fair to say that the pandemic really has added a new layer of anxiety to the basic human need for connection and touch. Let's face it, intimacy or the pursuit of pleasure really is murky business. Even in the best of times, it's pretty hard to get through this life these days without some form of wounding that affects our ability to be embodied and enjoy pleasure. Healing is something we experience in relationship, and the right kind of touch, offered or received mindfully, can be transformative. This is really where pleasure becomes an art or medicine, and I can think of no better person to speak on this topic than Betty Martin. Betty, along with her co-author Robin Dawson, have recently published The Art of Receiving and Giving, The Wheel of Consent. Betty is really recognized internationally as a thought leader in the area of consent and human sexuality, so a good portion of our conversation really focuses on distinguishing between the notion of giving consent and arriving at consent. Central to this really is the ability not only to set boundaries, but to ask what we want in relationship. The Wheel of Consent really is a model for how to become a good partner in pleasure. Throughout the course of this interview, I really got a sense of Betty's big view on sexuality and specifically what makes sex good. So if that's a topic that interests you, I hope you'll stick around. So Betty Martin, good morning and welcome to Awaken Relationship.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have you on the show for a while. As I was mentioning in our pre-chat, I have many friends that are kind of involved in your work in various communities, including sexological bodywork folk and certainly the people in the poly community and ethical non-monogamy community.
Yeah, great.
I think a good place to start our conversation is just talk a little bit about your own kind of journey into this work and why focus on consent.
That's a great question. I fell into this work through my own personal journey in my mid-40s, 20, 30 years ago. After divorce, I realized, my sexuality, it kind of works, but I know there's more. And I took a couple of workshops with the body more, and pretty soon I was assisting at them. And so it became a kind of a spiritual path for some years. And I met regularly with a group of friends who'd also done some of those workshops, and just dove into what is the spiritual nature of Eros, which is kind of funny to call it spiritual because I thought I knew what spiritual meant before I started that work. And then I realized that, it's not that. I found that the more physical I could get with the experience, the more I could tend to the physical sensation, the more spiritual it felt. So I don't know what spiritual means anymore, but at any rate, it was definitely a path for me for those some years. And after a while, 10 years or so, I realized I want to offer these kinds of experiences to other people. So I was practicing chiropractic at that time. So I closed that office, moved into the city, and opened a new studio doing sacred intimate work or sex work, where I would guide people through their own erotic experiences to help them notice more of themselves and learn more about themselves. And and then, of course, once you start working with people, that's where you really learn a lot about people and yourself. So during one of those workshops, we learned a game called the 3-minute game, and this was developed by Harry Faddis, who used to teach for the school. And the 3-minute game is very, very simple. It's 2 questions, and 2 people take turns asking each other these 2 questions. And the 2 questions are, what do you want me to do to you for 3 minutes? Well, that's fun. I can think of some cool things. And the other question is, what do you want to do to me for 3 minutes? That one also was very fun. And so I took those 2 questions home to my client sessions, and I started asking my clients. I changed it somewhat because of what I was teaching. So I would ask my clients, how do you want me to touch you for a few minutes right now? And many of them would say, well, gosh, I don't know, or they kind of deer in the headlights, and they just had no idea what they wanted, or didn't know how to ask for it, or didn't know that it was for them, or didn't know that it was possible to be touched in just the way they wanted. And they would say things, you'd ask them what they want, and they'd say things like, well, you can such and such, I guess, which might have been true, but it was not the question that I asked. I asked what you want. But it was really hard for people to notice what they wanted. And the same with the other question, how do you want to touch me? Then people would really get confused, because for the most part, we think that if you touch somebody, it's for their benefit. And so touching someone for your own benefit was kind of a mind fuck. People just couldn't figure out what the heck I was talking about. But right away, I noticed that, when we play this game, when I'm the one who's doing the touching, in one instance, it's for you. In the other instance, it's for me. And those are very different experiences. And so I just noticed that, who is doing is one question, and who is it for is an entirely different question, and doesn't really correlate with who is doing. So I could be touching you the way you want, or I could be touching you the way I want, and very different experience. So that's where the wheel of consent came from. And really, it should be called a wheel of agreement. But that's too long, and it's too late because it's already got a name. So that's how consent came to be important to me. It's not something that I set out to figure out. It just wasn't on my radar. I mean, I knew that, you needed consent before you touch people and stuff, but it wasn't that big of a deal to me at the time. So it was discovering these 2 different dynamics that really brought consent into sharp focus for me.
I think it's fair to say that consent has somewhat gone mainstream, mostly kind of in response to
Yeah.
toxic masculinity and the bad stuff that happens on campuses. Your approach to consent is I would say quite different.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily a kind of a legalistic approach.
Right.
It's really about kind of arriving at consent. Can you talk a little bit about the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. After I'd been teaching consent for some years, I thought I should probably look this up in the dictionary. So I did. And what I found was consent means agreeing to what somebody else wants. So I consent to do XYZ for you, or I consent to allowing you to do XYZ to me. And and it's important to have a legal definition, of course, but I'm using it in a more expanded way to mean what is it that we want to do together and what are we agreeing to do together to have the most fun. And so that's why I say giving consent or getting consent is not really the whole picture. I prefer to think of consent as something that we arrive at together. We have a little conversation about what are you into? What sounds fun? What are the things that you don't want to do? Will you scratch my back, honey? Sure. Can I play with your hair? Yes, but don't pull it. That's consent. So I'm using it in that kind of expanded way. And yes, there's definitely a need for a legal definition, but that's not really what I'm dealing with so much.
Intimate relationships, especially early on, are often kind of murky ground.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So there's always this kind of hodgepodge of kind of needs and wants, desires.
Yeah.
And I think, and this is also the case in long-term relationships, we move too fast, and so someone might agree to something that they really actually don't really want, or worse, someone takes something that's not on offer. How does the wheel of consent, particularly the quadrants? I know it's a big topic.
Yeah.
We could do a whole other podcast on the quadrants, but how does that clarify the whole process of becoming intimate with someone?
Oh boy. Well, the wheel of consent, it's a model. It's a way to look at things. And it's also a practice. So if we have as a practice, it means it's something you are fairly strict on the parameters of, and you come back and revisit it again and again. And as a practice, the wheel of consent is a practice at taking, receiving, and giving apart. So that either I'm giving, it's all about what you want, and I'm either giving you the action that I'm doing for you, scratching your back or whatever, or I'm giving you access to me to do what you want. Either way, it's about you. And so it's all about you for this, 5 or 10 minutes or whatever it is. And of course, I have my limits and I respect those and you respect those, but it's all about you. I'm giving you this gift. And then we switch, and then it's all about me. So either you're doing what I want you to do, you're scratching my back or whatever I've asked, or I'm allowing you to do to me something that you want to do. You're, playing with my hair, feeling up my legs, whatever. And again, I have limits and I'm going to be clear with those. So the practice of taking, receiving, and giving apart, why bother? Because why can't we just mush around and play like it's for both of us? And it's because when you take them apart, you are able to have experiences that you cannot have if you don't take them apart. There's a different set of experiences that are available to you, a different set of ahas, a different set of challenges, a different set of delights. It doesn't mean that you should live your whole life taking them apart. But as a practice, you learn how. And for one thing, you learn what they are. You learn what receiving a gift actually is when you're not trying to give something back at the same time. And that is life-changing. to have something be completely for you for this, this 10 minutes or whatever, that is really, yeah, that's life-changing. That cracks your heart right open. And so, yeah, to practice and take them apart. And then when you close the practice and go back into your regular life, then you can decide what to do with it. You can decide how it applies or how it doesn't apply, or you can play in a way that doesn't involve giving and receiving. That's just playing around in the middle. That's fine too. But what it does, so to practice. So what it does for your life and your relationship is that it clarifies dynamics that have been confusing. And so you can see, oh, this is where I'm setting aside what I want in order to go with what the other person wants. I'm giving to them. But oops, it's not something they actually wanted. So why did I do that? Or I'm over giving, or I'm giving, or I'm not asking for what I want. Why am I not asking for what I want? Well, of course, it's vulnerable. Or I'm expecting to receive this gift, but I never asked for it. I just expect it as if they're supposed to read my mind. Or then you have all these insights about your relationship dynamics, which can be hard to see in yourself,
Especially thinking about people that are in long-term relationships that are kind of stuck in a pattern.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Working with couples, it's just fascinating because when you have them ask each other these two questions, all kinds of dynamics will become visible that they weren't seeing before. That can be really interesting. And of course, if you're honest with yourself as a practitioner, you have to notice that, oh, here I am helping this person learn how to ask for what they want. I'm having trouble asking for what I want. So where am I going to clean that up? So that's one thing about working with people. It makes you notice where you're doing the same thing yourself, and you go, oh shit, I'm doing the same thing.
So we are kind of innately pleasure-seeking creatures, and of course, I think that's very much part of our kind of survival mechanism. Seeking out the good.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are many kinds of pleasure. And you focus a lot on tactile. Why is touch so important for our well-being?
Well, I think we're just wired that way, where it's inherently part of what our nervous system needs. I think part of it is the actual stimulus, the movement of something across your skin, for example, which of course you can do yourself with your hands, a towel, a sponge, a hairbrush, But I think the other part of it is the interpersonal connection that we're wired as human beings to need each other. We need each other. That's just the fact of it. And touch is one way that we convey appreciation, affection, respect, connection. It's just one way of many that we have of connecting. And neurologically, it's a very important one. It's the one that, as we age and die, it's the last one to go.
We're about a year and a half into this pandemic, and, it's kind of wearing thin on all of us. But what do you see as the sort of long-term consequences of social distancing and some of the other public health measures that really are kind of set up to prevent us from connecting?
Well, it's unfortunate that we have to social distance, but I'd rather be social distanced than dead. And I'd certainly rather be social distanced from my neighbors than have them dead. So I don't think it's unfortunate, yes, but it's not a deal breaker. It's not a killer. That said, if you are already depressed and anxious and isolated, it can be even harder on you. Absolutely. I think that's true. And if that's what it takes to minimize your risk of getting sick, then that's just what you got to do. However, I do want to make a distinction between connection and being physically close. Like you and I are connecting right now, and we're, hundreds of miles away. So there are ways to connect with each other and to notice that we're connected. They just may not be as fun as having a hug.
One thing I got from your book is really that pleasure is such a subjective experience. We each have kind of a ceiling of tolerance for touch. And sometimes that's set pretty early on because of old wounds. Can that change?
Oh, yeah. Because pleasure, yes, is absolutely subjective. It's an internal neurological phenomenon. So what brings me pleasure is going to be different than what brings you pleasure. And we do have a ceiling to how much pleasure we are emotionally comfortable with. So I might enjoy a teaspoon of pleasure, but if it gets up to a tablespoon, I'm starting to get nervous. Or if it gets up to a bucket full, then I'm really anxious. So it's completely natural to have a ceiling. Of course we do. And that ceiling is basically the point beyond which our shame and fear and self-doubt kicks in. Do I really deserve this? This makes me anxious. When's the other shoe going to drop? So yeah, we have a ceiling. And the way to expand that is to not try to push yourself. Just if you can enjoy a teaspoon, then enjoy a teaspoon and just enjoy it. And when it gets to be too much, then back off. It's not a problem. So that way you learn to trust yourself and kind of titrate it. And many of us, of course, are on this path of expanding our pleasure capacity, which is a really good thing to do.
That's a very kind of real way to kind of experience freedom. And perhaps that sort of gets into the sort of spiritual part that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, and for, expanding our own sense of pleasure, it doesn't have to be these huge earth-shaking experiences of cosmic orgasm, It's pausing a moment under the shower to notice that the warmth feels good on your back. And just wait there for 20 seconds and notice, oh, this feels really good. Or looking at the trees in the fall and the beautiful colors and just pause for 10 seconds and notice, oh, that's really beautiful. Or the feel of the fabric on your jacket. Oh, this feels really nice in my hands, and just pause for a few seconds and notice that. Like, pleasure is available just almost all the time if we just slow down and notice it. And the book, of course, is mostly about tactile pleasure because it's based on an experience of touch. But yes, there's many kinds of pleasure. Absolutely.
Relaxation seems to be key. For those that are listening that might get kind of overwhelmed in particularly in intimate situations, what would you suggest?
Ooh, that we could talk for a few days about that. That's a great question. What I suggest is go back to the practice of the 3-minute game of the Wheel of Consent. Take turns asking each other, how do you want me to touch you for 3 minutes? And how do you want to touch me for 3 minutes? Because so often when it comes to pleasure in relationship and in touch, which for many people also means sex, but not necessarily, what many people think is, well, the touch is happening, the hand is going down my back, so I'm supposed to like it, and what's wrong with me if I don't like it? And that is so sad and completely backwards. The question is not, why don't I like this? The more useful question is, what is it that I actually want? Maybe I want this hand on my back to be still and just stay there. Maybe I want this hand on my back to scratch me instead of caress me. Maybe I want this hand to not be on my back. Maybe I want this hand on my head. Or maybe I want this hand to hold my hand. Or maybe I want help with the laundry. Like, there's something that sounds meaningful and useful and good to you. And your opportunity, your job is to pause a little bit and notice what that thing is. So don't ask yourself, what's wrong with me? Why don't I like this? Ask yourself, what is it that actually sounds really good right now? And the thing about asking for what you want, it's hard. Of course it's hard. I don't know anybody who's really perfect at it. But the thing about playing the 3-minute game is that it creates a context in which now there's room for you to ask for what you want. Your partner says, how do you want me to touch you for 3 minutes? Well, that might be kind of awkward, but really it's a luxury to be asked what you want, because in not all situations do you have that opportunity. And now you have the opportunity and you have all the time in the world to ponder, what sounds good right now? Does this sound? No, that doesn't sound good. Oh, maybe my feet. No, that's not it. Oh, maybe my ears. No, that's not it. Oh, my calves. Would you squeeze my calves? And when it finally bubbles up to you what it is that you want, you'll find yourself going, yeah, that's what I want. Yeah, it's a hell yes. Yeah, that's what I want. Then that's what you ask for. So the structure of the practice creates the space where it becomes easier to ask for what you want. And nothing happens except exactly what you ask for. So there's nothing to go along with and endure. Yeah.
Follow the pleasure.
Yes. Instead of telling it where you think it's supposed to be. Well, I'm supposed to like this, so I'll ask for that. No, that's not it. That's not it.
My next question is somewhat provocative, and I kind of hope that I don't get flagged by the platforms. How do you like that for tension?
That's okay. I can't wait.
How do you define good sex?
Oh, I think that's a great question. I think, well, sex is, first of all, more than sticking some part in some other orifice or other. I think of sex as you're turned on and you choose to follow it. And the person you're with, if you're with somebody else, is also choosing to follow it. So that could mean lots of different things. You can have sex without touching. You can have sex from a different room. You can have sex across the continent. So get over this idea that sex is equal to intercourse. It's not. Or even sex is equal to genitals. There's some very sexy things you could play with that don't involve the genitals at all. But to make it great, I think it needs to be what is real for you, not what is real for me. Because you're going to have different things that turn you on than I am. You're going to have different kinds of people that you're attracted to than I am or somebody else is. Great sex means it's meaningful to you and it expresses who you are instead of who you think you're supposed to be, or who society has told you you're supposed to be, or who you think your partner thinks you're supposed to be. It's what's meaningful to you. And that said, what I also think, this is my own personal thing about what makes sex great for me, for example, is a sense of play, which means responding to what's happening instead of going according to some plan. And to do that, there are some skills that you need, and consent skills are some of those skills. But for me, a sense of play is really important.
Where things like technique, or there's innumerable books about how to give your partner the cosmic orgasm you talked about.
Right.
But somehow the focus on technique seems to get in the way of that kind of authentic experience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm much more interested in responding to the person and the situation and the feeling right in front of me and see where it goes. I'm not, I might want a technique for, 5 minutes, do me this way, but that's not really what makes great sex by any means. I think I say in the book, if you're relying on technique, you're missing the best part.
We began our conversation talking about the sort of origins of consent in the mainstream really being toxic masculinity. And I assume that many of the men listening to this episode are kind of actively working to heal that. What do you hope men listening to this talk will walk away from this conversation with?
I hope men understand that they have gotten just as short an end of the stick as women have, and other gendered people have. That for the most part, this is a gross generalization, but if you grew up as a boy, there were certain things that you were taught that were not available to you, that you weren't allowed to have your feelings. You weren't allowed to be sensual. You weren't allowed to express yourself with brightly colored clothes and dancing and, all the stuff that people who were raised as girls mostly got access to. And that costs something. That has a serious cost to self-awareness, to joy, to self-expression, to freedom, to the ability to connect with people. And you're not broken. There are ways to reclaim and rediscover these aspects of yourselves, just as women are, and I'm talking here mostly about cisgender women, although I think it probably holds for trans women as well. There are things which women are learning to recover that were denied to them as children. And there are things that men are learning to recover that were denied to them as children. And as a general rule, those are kind of the opposite things for most people.
Wonderful. Well, I feel like we've just done this kind of flyby of that we'll consider hoping in the future we can get you back and do a little bit of a deeper dive. Thank you so much, Betty, for this conversation. And for those that want to learn more about your work and the book, where can they go?
BettyMartin.org. The book is at wheelofconsentbook.com. Both of those websites link to the other, so you'll find one, you'll find the other. And you can get a free chapter download from the book site. So you can see if the book appeals to you or not, and it gives you a pretty good idea of what it's about. We're also, my colleagues and I teach classes and workshops, schoolofconsent.com. Again, all those websites connect to each other. And yeah, go get yourself a free chapter of the book and see if you like it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
You are so welcome. It's nice to talk with you.
Thank you again so much to Betty for this wonderful conversation. If you want to find out more about her work, head to bettymartin.org. Or if you want to grab a free chapter of the book, go to wheelofconsent.com. And I'll be sure to post some links in the show notes. If you're loving the content here on Awakened Relationship, I'd really appreciate just taking a moment and leaving a quick review on Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps me to grow the show, so thank you. And as always, I really appreciate your feedback or ideas for future episodes. You can reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter, or shoot me a quick message through the contact page of my website. So thank you, dear listener, for tuning in, and till next time, I hope you're following your pleasure and staying connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device, or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.